Hello, everyone, and thank you so very much for joining today's webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing wireless for musicians, guitarists, and bassists. But before we get into that, just a few items of housekeeping. First of all, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. Usually takes us about a week or so to get that recording ready, but once it is available, you'll be able to see it at shure.com/webinars. That website again is shure.com/webinars. Not only will you be able to see this webinar there, but you'll also be able to see all of our past webinars. We have a lot of great sessions across all sorts of audio topics. So please feel free to go there and peruse all of the past webinars we've done. You can also see all of our upcoming webinar information there as well. So that's shure.com/webinars. And also as a side note, we will send a link of the recording once it's available to all the attendees. So keep an eye on your email too, and we'll send you that link once it's ready. Second of all, as we go through the sessions today, if you have any questions, please feel free to type those in the Q&A pane. But be patient because we will be holding on questions until the end of the session. All right, so let's get into the good things. What are we going to be doing today, and who are we going to be doing it with? I have two fabulous co-workers and friends on the line with me today, Ms. Laura Clapp Davidson and Mr. Pete Carparelli. Just great people, and they're going to give us all sorts of great information. And what is that information we're going to have today? Well, let's look at that agenda. We're going to start by talking about wireless components, then a hot topic on how to choose the best system for your needs. I think that's one of the biggest questions we ever get here. Then we're going to talk about how to integrate that wireless into your setup, and then we'll dive into that Q&A. So let's get into the learning. Take it away, Laura and Pete.
Well, thank you so much, Cheryl.
Before we're going to do a poll first.
We got one more thing. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks for reminding me. All right, so we're going to do a quick little poll here. We want to get to know a little bit about you and everyone who's attending and where you stand right now with wireless. So, launching this poll. Please tell us, how much do you know about wireless? Do you have no idea and didn't even know that you could go wireless? Do you have basic setup knowledge? Can you easily coordinate and troubleshoot a whole system for an arena tour? Or you know so much you could be teaching this session. And, you know, if you click that one, be careful because we might call on you. I'm just kidding.
Yes.
All right. So where do you two fall on this one, Laura and Pete?
Well, hopefully we're the last one, but
I'm going to say anywhere between.
Depends.
Yeah, it depends on the day, depends on the mood, depends on the weather. Probably going to be anywhere between answers 2 through 4. Because if I said 1, I don't know if I'd have a job.
Yeah,
that's a very good point. I don't want to get anybody in trouble here. I would say that, you know, I'm somewhere between 2 and 3. I definitely know how to set up a wireless, and I could manage a couple of systems. I don't know if I could do 20. So I'm going to say I'm somewhere between 2 and 3.
Okay.
So it looks like we have about 80% of everybody responding here. So I'm going to close this poll and I'm going to show the results really quick. So it looks like we've got a good group of people here that the bulk, they know enough to set up a basic wireless system, I think, which is a good place to come into this session with. We're going to kind of talk about that and then kind of take it a few steps beyond. So thank you so much for participating in the poll.
15% saying they could teach the class. Well, you might want to go have lunch instead then.
Yeah, might want to take a quick 5 and come back.
Yeah, because we're gonna take you through the basics, and then we're gonna get into some of the troubleshooting and issues that you might run into. So if you already know this stuff, you know, go grab a coffee. But what we're gonna do is give you kind of an overview of what makes up a wireless system and how those different components work together and things you should take into consideration when you're selecting a wireless system, because there's several to choose from and it can get pretty darn overwhelming. So that's where we're going to be starting and where we're going to be going, and then hopefully getting some questions from you, because I don't like to be talked at for an hour, so I don't think Pete does either. So that's the plan. So we're going to jump in. And just a little bit more about me and Pete. I work in market development, meaning I get to go out and train people and design courses with another colleague who's joining us, Aijan, from our Shure Audio Institute. If you're looking to get some great education from Shure, you should go there. And yeah, we get to go to trade shows, my team and I, and launch products and talk about products and play with gear. And Pete gets to play with gear all day too in a different way. Pete, why don't you tell them what you do?
Yeah, being in applications engineering, it's kind of a mixed bag. Kind of, you wear a lot of different hats in our department. You know, one minute you're on the phone with a customer, you might be troubleshooting a simple 2-channel wireless rig. The next call could be handling, you know, our top tier wireless systems with CBS or at Carnegie Hall. The next day you might be authenticating vintage product, dating it, figuring out when it was made or, you know, who owned it. And then the next day we might be running a training or appearing in a webinar, much like today. We're kind of the repository for technical support, knowledge assistance, catch-all, product support, product development assistance, a little bit of everything. It's a fun job.
So if you call in to Shure, you might hear that voice on the other end of the phone. You just might. Now you can put a face to the voice. All right, so enough about us. Let's talk about wireless. So when you think about a wireless system, there are 3 main components to be considering, and this makes up every channel of wireless. So you have your microphone or input source. A lot of people might think that it's only a handheld or only a lavalier, but there's an instrument body pack that can go into your transmitter and use a 1/4-inch cable, or your input source, your guitar, or your microphone if you're talking, and then the transmitter itself is that handheld thing or the body pack that is physically transmitting your wireless signal, and then your receiver, which receives said signal and converts it into an electrical signal and gets you into the board and into the PA and all that wonderful stuff. So when you think of wireless, that's your system. That's a channel, and you have to have this whole system per channel of wireless. So sometimes, and we'll get to it, some people say, well, can I use multiple microphones with my receiver? And Pete, the answer is
no.
With your single channel receiver.
With your single channel receiver, that is, unless you have a dual or a quad, which we make, then you can get 2 or 4.
Yes, but it's 1 transmitter per receiver. All right, so that's the basic components of that. And the basic wireless signal path and path in general is that your transmitter, AKA that thing you're holding or you're wearing on your body, sends a receiver the information to internal or external antennas, but traditionally, let's talk about our BLX that's on the screen right now. There's no other components in the pathway. And this is why wireless is so convenient, because it allows you to jump all over the stage. It allows you to have freedom and flexibility, which is why wireless is so desirable to many people, because they want to have that freedom. But that's the basic path. You have your RF signal, or you're using 2.4 or 5.8 gigahertz to transmit that signal back to your receiver from your transmitter. And again, the transmitter can come in a multitude of form factors, such as handheld, where it's housed within the microphone handle. Most people would see this as a microphone and call it a day, but there's a lot going on under the hood. I actually have one. Oh, look at that, show and tell. This is our GLXD Plus, and this is what it looks like without its little case on there. So, you know, this is the whole transmitter itself with the antenna. And a quick tip, when you're holding a handheld transmitter, don't hold it by the bottom, because then, please don't, because this is your antenna, at least for Shure products, and it will cause dropouts. So anyway, I digress, as I am wont to do. Handheld transmitters, body pack transmitters for instruments or lavalier microphones. This is where you would plug in the microphone to that pack, and it has that little antenna right here built into it that's going to work to communicate with your receiver. And then a plug-on, which is one of, not a new form factor, but one of our newest pieces that we have here. And that's if you already have a wired microphone and you want to convert it into wireless, you can do that. Really great for reporting, field recording. What are some other use cases for the 83?
Sometimes people more recently have been using it to do measurements of rooms wirelessly, which is pretty cool. We've seen a lot of folks also put you know, like media players, or put the output of a camera or recording system for video that might have a built-in microphone into that, and then send it off to an AD receiver if they can't run cable that long a distance.
Brilliant. I love that. Okay, well, I learned something new today. So handheld, body pack, or plug-on are the 3 main form factors that we'll talk about today. And then for the receiver side of it, was there anything you wanted to add to transmitters before I scooch on that?
No, that covered that.
Okay, rock and roll. Tabletop, rack mount, and portable. And the latest fun piece that Pete and I are big fans of. But let's start with tabletop. first and foremost. So tabletop, you'll notice a couple things about it. It's meant to sit on a table, hence being called tabletop. It has external antennas, except if it's a BLX system, which would have internal. And this just allows you to have portability. So if you need to put this in a backpack, if you need to have just a single channel of wireless, let's say you're a presenter and you travel around and do gigs, speaking engagements, I should say, that's a great option for that. You can just put it out, have your single channel of wireless, have your receiver that sits on the tabletop and your transmitter that you talk into, and you're good to go. Now, if you want to be more robust, and let's say you're a touring musician, the rack mount option is a great solution there, because you can often have, as you'll see here, multiple channels of wireless. So there's 4 channels within this particular unit. And we make several systems, or 2 systems that have quads, right? Yes. And then also the dual, as Pete mentioned. So rack mounting is great when you know you're going to have a fixed system that you want to be able to plug in, travel to multiple cities, and go. Other use cases for rack that I'm forgetting, I mean, installs, permanent installs too.
Yeah, permanent installs pretty big. Rack mount stuff is pretty typical, especially if you're running, if multiple musicians are, for instance, using direct, like modeling rigs, or you're using, you know, an analog amp sim of some kind, and you want to keep everything in a rack. The whole enclosed system thing is starting to become more and more common with touring bands and even local bands that gig out a lot. So rack mount just kind of makes your install a little bit cleaner. It's more of a straightforward setup where you don't have to worry about as much cabling or any extra setup steps.
Right. So this would not be a portable solution in its standalone form. If you put it into a rack, then the rack can be moved, but
yes,
tabletop for portability, rack mount for more of an install or a touring situation. The portable, now that I'm saying portable and the tabletop's portable, you also have the portable as well. Do you want to talk about the ADX 5D? Because this thing is just a killer piece of gear.
It's super cool. You know, most commonly seen on production sets, you can, you know, plug it into a field recording belt, you know, the bandolier that a lot of field techs wear, and have multiple receivers on your person. And then, you know, for instance, you can monitor the conditions of the people who are maybe, you know, recording a scene and they're talking, you want to monitor dialogue. Or if you're doing, you know, just field reporting and, you know, you don't want to have a boom mic over your talent or your, you know, presenters as you're walking around, you can put a wireless transmitter on them and then move with the receiver and still be out of the shot. That's a very cool piece of gear, very common type of setup for that.
Yes, and multiple form factors for it, as well as including slot in or like in the bag, as you mentioned. So if you're in the field, you're doing field recording, this is a highly professional application for this particular product. And this is in our top tier wireless called Axient Digital. Now, the bottom right is a very unique form factor, and that is our GLXD 6 Plus guitar pedal. So that is a receiver in the form of a guitar pedal. So this is meant to live on your pedal board or be on the floor. It has a built-in tuner. It has a 1/4-inch input now, thanks to an output as well. And this just launched March 1st. So this is new, but this one's a little bit different in that it has this form factor that's not in the traditional sense, particularly geared towards guitarists, bass players, and Pete, you love this one. I don't want to leave anything out for you.
It's the coolest one. I'm not biased at all. No, it really is a neat piece of innovation, because you think about, you know, for years and years and years, guitarists and bassists have run around wirelessly, but commonly you've had to have a rack mount receiver, you know, or you've had to have a larger tabletop receiver, and now the technology's come so far that you can use, you know, digital tuning technology, you can use RF technology that's, you know, had decades of advancement, fit it into this small form factor. Oh yeah, get 70 to 100 feet away from it, and you can use an accurate needle or strobe tuner in one little enclosure that can live on your pedal board and simplify your rig. Like that in and of itself right there is all the best parts. All the best parts of wireless, plus making your rig simpler. That's good stuff.
It's good stuff. So you'll notice that when you look at these receivers, some of them have antennas and some don't. And so I want to talk a little bit about how to choose a wireless system. And that's one of the questions you're going to be asking yourself is where you're going to be using it, because that antenna comes into play. For example, with that GLXD 6 Plus, it has an internal antenna and you want to maintain line of sight because it doesn't have that reach that some of these other systems do. But let's talk about how you can choose your wireless system, now that you know all the components. And we're moving pretty fast. So, if you have some questions, of course, put them in there so we can answer them for you. Cheryl, if there's anything that's coming up that's, really topical and pertinent, just feel free to jump in. I know you said we'd save it to the end, but I don't ever do that. So, let's see. All right.
So far, so good.
Okay, good. So these are our 3 kind of favorite guiding questions that we as Shure, but Pete and I specifically ask people when we're trying to figure out what they need for a wireless system. And so this is hopefully something that you can apply. Let's say you're speccing a system for yourself, or you've been voluntold that you're going to be doing this for your church. This is a great little guide to start with. Okay, so let's start with the what do you need to mic. And Pete, do you want to go through this part of it?
Yeah. So starting with the what is, it's the first step in many, but knowing if it's an instrument wireless system or if it's a vocal system. Does the person prefer a handheld microphone, or do they want to wear a head-worn microphone, or perhaps a lavalier and clip it to their clothing? That's step 1. Step 2 is how many of those systems do you need? And then the third question here is kind of, it's getting a little less common to differentiate between analog and digital, but it's still a valid point, because certain digital wireless systems will have features and technologies that analog systems don't. So once we've made those determinations from the beginning, then we move to where you're going to be using your wireless system. And that's, like it implies here, rack mounted or on stage. What range do you physically need? Are you getting 20 feet away from the receivers? Are you getting 200 feet away? Are you going to be going from venue to venue, night after night, day after day, or are you going to be at a fixed location? And will the antennas be with the receivers, or will they be away from the receivers? Another big question here too is where, meaning where in the country? Where are you using them in relation to major cities, towns, television broadcast markets, public safety? A number of other sources of interference can come around. So we always want to check that as well. But then
that's important. The where.
The where applies to both local and
where will it physically be placed, and where will you be using it in the world? Yeah, exactly.
And then the which features you need are super important too. As the technology again, has come so far, you can take advantage of rechargeable batteries. We've got a number of solutions for different wireless products that allow you to charge the battery in the microphone or in the pack, so that way you don't even have to take anything out. Are you in GLXD2 Plus? Here, thank you. Do you find yourself in a situation where encryption of that signal is important? Particular board meetings or confidential discussions on new decisions in a larger company. Those are common scenarios there. Government install as well. Yep. Networking. Do you want to get the gear on a network so that way you can monitor everything at once and deploy frequencies and coordinate? For instance, using our wireless workbench software. Also, networking enables you with certain products to take advantage of Dante audio and do everything in the digital realm with as few analog connections as possible. And then lastly, budget. Dictating, do you want solid metal components? Are you okay with plastic? And, the construction of the receivers. Are you going to be rack mounting? All of these things kind of come into price point, and that differentiates a lot of different wireless systems along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're looking at this and you're on the newer end of newer to wireless spectrum, some of these questions can even seem overwhelming. So the main things though, how many people need to be mic'd up, or how many people need to use wireless? Where are you going to be using it? And that distance thing is a really key part of the equation. And then what's your budget? The encryption and networking, that's for more advanced, if you want to have those features. If you don't even know what encryption is, you're good. And the rechargeability, some of our systems, as Pete said, have rechargeability and some don't. So you just want to look into that and see what's going to fit your budget and your desires. So this is just a general guide, but we use this a lot. We use this a lot to start conversation. All right, so great. You've asked yourself those questions. Now what? Now what do you do? So you want to make sure that you're taking inventory of any existing wireless. So let's say you are in a house of worship or you're at a school. A lot of times there's some wireless that maybe, historical or antique or might need some updating. So
Mhm.
you want to make sure you're taking an inventory to see what's still usable and what just needs to go. And a lot of times in the education and house of worship sectors, we'll say, I'm keeping it. I'm keeping everything. I never know when I'll need
Mhm.
it. But some of those systems are not just antiques, they're literally illegal to use because they're broadcasting on a frequency that is now no longer available. So take the inventory to see what you have. That way you can know what you have to replace and then determine that budget, which we said on the earlier slide, but still keeping that in mind. What are you going to feel comfortable paying per channel? And you got to remember, again, it has to have that transmitter and receiver per channel in order to function. Consider the future.
Mhm.
So you're building your system. Okay, well, we only have, a pastor and a choir leader, and that's all we'll need. Okay, well, what happens if you expand the congregation or you're at school? We
Right.
only have, our school's only 120 kids. We're a small private school. Great. Well, what happens when you get that grant and you get to expand? Just stretch as far as you can to consider the future.
Yeah, always assume. I hate to use the term worst case scenario, but it's a common one when we take calls with customers. So they call in, I might only need 2 channels, but how many will you really need if, for instance, you have a larger event or a larger band comes in and they want to use house wireless? Give me worst case scenario or most possible systems that you could conceive, in your venue. That's always a very, very, very important question to ask.
Yes, absolutely. And so then you want to select your wireless systems. And there's several ways of doing that. We have some cool tools on Shure.com where you can kind of guide yourself through where you're wanting to mic and where you're wanting to use your wireless. We also have some amazing dealer partners who can help guide you in that decision process once you've honed in on those features on the previous slide, the what, where, and which. And then so you select your wireless systems and you now have to figure out, okay, where am I physically putting these? Because the accessories come into play, right,
That
Pete?
they do. Oh, yes. Making sure you've got the appropriate antennas for your rig, making sure you're using the right cabling, making sure that you've got it placed in the appropriate locations, making sure you've got, if you are using rechargeable batteries, do you have some in the transmitters or body pack receivers if you're running in your monitors for that gig? And do you have backups? Where's the rack of all of your gear going to live on stage? All of those things are very, very, very important variables to consider because that can change drastically what you end up getting in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've given you the components and we've given you the kind of guiding questions. This webinar is entitled, wireless setup for guitarists, musicians, bassists. So here's some great choices as starting points. So if you are out in the field and you're a musician, I know I've talked about house of worship and education, but we had a mixed bag of people who said they wanted to know different things. So great choices for musicians. Obviously, that top left, that was what Pete and I were talking about. The GLXD is our new GLXD Plus. And so you could see that there, that's the guitar system. So the GLXD 16 Plus. So great choice if you're going to be going around to different cities and you don't want to have to worry as much about figuring out which frequencies you can transmit in because GLXD Plus transmits on 2.4 and 5.8 or 5.8, I should say, gigahertz.
Yep.
So it will automatically scan when you turn on the transmitter and receiver, it automatically syncs up. It's going to figure out is 5.8 better or is 2.4 better? And just some history and insight into what that means. 2.4 can get a little congested because of Wi-Fi routers, because of our cell phones. So you might be scanning before the gig and it's fine. And then you get a bunch of bodies in there on their cell phones and they all, are taking up that bandwidth. The GLXD Plus, when you scan it and turn it on before the gig, 5.8, it'll select it, stay with that, and get you nice and clear. So you're going to have less dropouts and a great experience. So that's the benefit of that particular system, as opposed to going with something like the BLX, which is on the right, or the SLXD, which is on the bottom. It's kind of preference and budget based.
Yeah.
You want to dive into there's a big difference between BLX and SLXD.
Yeah, there's some key differences here. GLXD obviously being 2.4 and 5.8 gigahertz, so you could take those virtually anywhere in the world and not need licensing. You won't have to worry about broadcast television or public safety or utility meters, you know, two-way radios typically, won't affect GLXD. Because it's up in that range though, the maximum range between the transmitter and the receiver does come down a little bit. You might get about 100 feet in ideal conditions, which is still really good considering most clubs don't have a 100-foot stage for you to run
Right.
around.
Right.
Now, conversely with BLX, it doesn't operate in 2.4 or 5.8 gig, neither does SLXD. They're in what we call UHF frequency ranges, so those can get you in ideal conditions around 300 feet line of sight between the transmitter and the receivers. Now, if you need longer range use, those are going to be the systems for you to look at, hands down. But BLX doesn't have rechargeable battery solutions. You could use rechargeable AA's, but you know, we don't make those. That's totally fine, and you can use go that route if you'd like. And it's a much simpler system. You know, there's no automatic syncing. You know, there's no frequency hopping technology, but you know, it's a robust little analog wireless system. It's been around a long time.
Great.
Sounds great. It's super easy to use, and it's about $300 a channel. For the price point, you really can't do. You can't go wrong with BLX. With SLXD, that's a replacement for our original SLX analog wireless system, where now we have full digital audio quality, much like GLXD, wider tuning ranges than BLX, you know, around 40 megahertz. So we've seen as many as 30 systems or 30 channels of SLXD running at a single time in a single venue in one frequency band, which is pretty good for a system that, you know, starts, I think it's around 700 per channel.
US. Gotta
US,
say that.
yes, 700 US, that's correct. And, you know, you get sleek body pack, you know, that's nice rounded edges, comfortable to wear, easy to put on a guitar strap, or, you know, a clip on the back of your belt. And you get removable cartridges now with the handhelds. So now you can change, you know, if you have an SM58 one day, but you want to use a KSM8 the next, you can just unthread the cartridge, swap them out, and you've got a whole new microphone the next day. So plenty of differentiation between the three, but they all offer something that the others don't for, you know, different budgets, different applications, different people.
Exactly. So that's why it's fun to have all those different options, and why you should really work with your sales professional to kind of determine which one is going to be the best fit for you. But
That is correct.
those are the overviews in terms of what each system has, and some pluses for all of them, in my opinion. You know, they're like all my favorite children. All right, so that's the little, you know, push about what Shure products there are, but let's talk about how to just integrate it more generally into your wireless setup. So now you've got your wireless and you're ready to go, and we haven't really talked about accessories much. We've talked about antennas a little bit, but this is a very key portion of wireless that a lot of people don't understand or they forget about. And the antenna is key, because it's how these two pieces of equipment are going to talk to one another. And if you don't have clear line of sight, you're going to have dropouts, because if you put anything between them, you're going to have interference, especially people. Our bodies do not, it turns out, transmit or let waves pass through us very well, because we're big bags of seawater, as our friend Tim would always say. So you want to make sure that when you have this system, that the antenna, since it's the interface, has that clear line of sight. So we wanted to go over some of the basics to just figure out which antenna is going to be right for you. So Pete, I'm going to let you take this one.
Yeah, easy, and well put. Especially, you know, the saltwater argument is a hard one for a lot of people. You know, they don't know that at first, and you kind of go, "Wait, I'm the problem."
Me?
You know, me? I'm the problem? But you know, it can be easily circumvented. You know, the antenna for the transmitter, whether it be a body pack or a handheld, you know, that we can kind of control. You know, if you're holding the handheld microphone transmitter appropriately and you're not covering the bottom of it, thank you for pointing that out earlier.
Sure.
That is step one. Now, a body pack can be a little trickier. You know, you're wearing it immediately on your side or on your back or on a guitar strap that's going to be behind you. Yeah, the body will absorb some of that radiated energy, but if you're moving around, if the antennas for the receivers are appropriately placed, you can overcome that, because it's not just, RF doesn't travel in a straight line. There's direct, and then there's reflected, you know, ambient product, you know, off of walls, floors, ceilings, etc. But But the big questions, that we need to cover, are you running more than a couple of wireless systems? Will the receivers, for instance, be side stage or in a gear rack that might be behind a monitor console, or will they be behind a stage prop or a stage wall? And are you going to have the antennas for those receivers, 50, 100, 200 feet away from the transmitters? So those are all common questions. We ask them every day to people who want to pick a wireless system, and that's how we determine, okay, this is what you need, or this is what you don't need. This is where it should be, and this is where it shouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. Because when you look at the placement recommendations, this is where it comes into place, pun intended. So, if you have that clear line of sight, like we've talked about, you want 10 feet between your transmitter and your receiver. So that's kind of an ideal if you're not using any sort of extended system. Whereas if you have antennas and multiple antennas, you want to keep the distance in between from your antennas. So we're showing paddles in this, but the 6 inches is more for half-wave antennas, right, Pete? When you want to keep that 6-inch diversity.
Yeah, you usually want even a distance that short will still enable proper full diversity for the wireless system, so the receiver can switch between them and not get as tricked, I guess, by inadequate transmission from the transmitter. If there's other interference, the receiver can switch from A or B accordingly, so that way it avoids those dropouts.
Right. And the minimum distance, this is important that you have that minimum distance from transmitter to receiver so you don't have RF overload. So that's what that's referring to in that, which is no bueno, because it does not like that. And you'll have, you'll confuse it, you'll trick it, as Pete said.
And it won't sound good, because it'll either drop out, or you might get audible artifacts, or even clipping and distortion in the signal. Yeah, we definitely don't want to get too close.
Right, exactly. And then the parallel metal surfaces. This is a very important one too, Pete, right?
Yeah, that's a big one. We, routinely have to remind folks, human body, obviously not good. Wood, drywall, pretty bad. Metal,
really bad.
No way. That is the end all of surfaces or boundaries for wireless that we want to avoid. Especially, a common one is we'll design a wireless system, for instance, for like a baseball field. And you have the backstop that's a chain link fence, and people will think, oh, we need to protect the antennas and put them behind the chain link fence because we can still see it, but because there's that cage there made of metal, the RF will not pass through there.
Right, because the waves can't pass through in their entirety.
That's right.
Right.
So we want to make sure we avoid parallel metal. Just avoid metal as best you can, unless you're mounting them appropriately on the front of a rack. Or if they're on top of something, like on a shelf or anything, and you've got a stand that they can be, adequately elevated away from them, that's good.
Well, and then the picture on the far right, the bottom right, that's something to lean into as well, because Pete had mentioned if you have more than 3 systems, you want to use antenna distribution is what we're going to talk about.
Big time, yeah.
But we'll often see, like if we're in the field, we'll see a rack and there's all these half-wave antennas just all sticking up into each other, because you see the outputs on the back of your receiver and you think, okay, I'm just going to put my antennas on there. Well, that's great, except it's not. It's like you're physically able to do it, but we make antenna combiners and distribution that allow you to plug one set of antennas in and then cascade down to your subsequent system. So we'll get there in a second. All right, so basics of height. We talked about this as well. Get up above the human bodies.
Unless you're in a room of, NBA players, you typically can assume 7-8 feet is an adequate height to make sure that the antennas are above any seawater in the room to avoid, body absorption dropouts or line of sight blockages.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're going to receive or absorb that radio frequency energy, and you don't want that. And also you'll see that there's cables running to the antenna. You want to take into account the cable length, because you will lose signal strength. So you might need to be putting in a signal booster. So this is what we're saying in this next slide is best practices. We're going to leaning into this position for best line of sight. Use half wave or directional antennas. Half wave are the ones in the top right picture, directional on the bottom. Maintain that diversity separation, which we had mentioned earlier, the 6 inches, the minimum 10 feet. and use that minimum cable length, or use an amplifier where necessary. And use lowest signal loss cable. That's important. Don't cheap out on cables.
Important. Yeah, you can spend all the money in the world on the wireless and then get the cheapest available coaxial cable that might be 15 dB of loss per 100 feet, and that is no good. We want to make sure, yes, while lower loss cables tend to be a little thicker, they're not as pliable. It is worth it. Trust us. At the end of the day, you know, if you spend a little more money on the quality of the cable, the wireless systems, you know, your mileage may vary, but you will go much further if you don't cheap out on the cable.
Yes. There's also a handy tool on Shure.com, the wireless accessories wizard, which allows you to put in your system that you're going to be using, how many channels, the antenna types. It'll tell you what exactly you need, if you need amps, how much, you know, distance and cable and all of that. It's amazing. It's a tool that I think your team uses all the time, if I'm not
dozens of times a day, every day, and we encourage our customers when they're on the phone with us or if they're writing in via email or chatting, we send them the links. That way you can play along as we're going through the steps with you.
Nice.
Because then you learn a little bit more about the gear. You know, you better set yourself up for success down the road if you learn even just a teeny bit about how everything gets wired up. That means we've done our job.
Yeah, exactly. So that's available for everybody on Shure.com under support. It's the wireless accessory wizard. And then we also have the frequency finder, which we'll get to in just a second. All right, but frequency coordination. So now we've talked about all the components of the system, how to choose your wireless system, where to put it, how to put it together, why antennas are important. Now the frequency coordination, which we touched on a little bit, but you have to coordinate your frequencies and be aware of your frequencies too. Like I mentioned, those obsolete systems that might be illegal to transmit on. You have to make sure you're broadcasting in a clean, clear, legal frequency. And then if you have multiple channels, you have to coordinate those frequencies, because otherwise what happens, Pete?
Well, if we don't choose our frequencies and we don't choose them wisely, we can run into system-to-system interference, or we can run into exterior interference. Broadcast television is the biggest culprit. You have to be off of active TV channels, because within about a 60-mile radius, a full power television station can affect a wireless system. That's, you know, if we put that into scale, you know, the average wireless microphone operates at about 10 milliwatts, or thousandths of a watt. Whereas a full power broadcast television station is going to be about 1 million. So the bigger number will always win in the world of RF. So we want to make sure that we choose the appropriate frequencies, and if we have multiple systems, we want to make sure that we're coordinating them amongst each other. We can't just pick them at random. We have to do this in a coordinated fashion. That way everything works harmoniously, and you can get, you know, as many possible systems at any given time running effectively.
Yes, and we happen to make this really cool tool called Wireless Workbench that allows you to coordinate multiple systems, including systems that aren't ours. So also you can coordinate your in-ears and your wireless systems and, you know, competitive product, and then also look for the TV channels to make sure you're not stepping on those. And Wireless Workbench gives you that holistic overview on your desktop, and then lets you deploy if the system allows for that, right from Wireless Workbench. And so that's super handy.
You can even take a snapshot if you have networked wireless gear such as SLXD, QLXD, ULXD, or Axient Digital. You can actually scan with one of the receivers and their antennas to take a snapshot, or, you know, a site survey, if you will, of the current RF conditions. So, you know, you start with all of the wireless transmitters off, you do a quick scan into Wireless Workbench, and it'll show you where your RF noise floor is. Are there any active television stations? And then you can coordinate with even more information at your fingertips. And, you know, with a couple of minutes to, you know, to get the hang of it, you can start coordinating 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 wireless systems, you know, and get really into the coordination aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can also deploy from there as well, which is super handy. And we just launched a new version of that, Wireless Workbench 7, which allows you to have a new scan library feature. So you can access scan libraries from around the world before you even get to where you're going, and see what historical RF scans were looking like. So really cool tool, again, under support on Shure.com.
Yes.
And we also, when you're finding that system initially, you want to take into consideration the wireless frequency that you're going to be using. And you also want to make sure that you're going to get a system that's going to have the maximum number of channels available to you. So if you know that you're going on a multi-city tour, you can kind of check and plan which system is going to broadcast where and give you the most open channels. So we have this tool called the Wireless Frequency Finder, and you put in your location and your system type, and it will tell you how many available channels are typically available within that band, because each one of the systems, unless it's GLXC Plus, has that specific band that it's transmitting in, which is its frequency range, essentially.
Yeah, and a great way to look at it, and thank you for bringing this up, if you are going to be, let's say, you're regionally active, you go from Chicago, maybe you go down to Champaign, Urbana, Illinois, you go to Bloomington, maybe you do Northwest Indiana, or you're in New York City one day, you're down in New Jersey, maybe you go up to Connecticut. The television station markets might not fluctuate a ton, but depending on where you are, they may get a little friendlier. In other cities, it may get a little more hostile, as we like to call it in our department, but you want to see the highest average number for maximum total systems. That's where you're going to get the most out of your wireless system. So, if you only need 2 systems, but the average number you saw was 9, you're in the clear. You're ready to go, across all of those cities.
Yeah, exactly. And we can help walk you through that too, or again, your Shure sales provider can help you guide that conversation. So just to go over things again real quick, we talked about the components. So of your wireless system, there's that microphone, whether it's a lavalier, handheld, or a guitar cable into your guitar. Your transmitter, which is usually a handheld or a body pack, and a receiver, which is desktop or tabletop, rack mount, floor, or the portable that we showed you guys. And then things to consider when you're starting this process of choosing your wireless: how many do you need? So what kind of wireless are you going to be needing? Where are you going to be using it? How far away? And which features are important to you? And then take into account those best practices, positioning for best line of sight, always keeping that first and foremost, maintaining diversity in your antennas and using the proper antennas so you don't have dropouts, and making sure to coordinate your frequencies and address that to avoid any interference. And so if you have more questions for us, we're going to jump into the questions part now, but to reach out to Pete and his team, you can go to shure.com/contact and submit a support ticket. That's going to be your fastest way to get in touch with them. There's also a phone number on the bottom of that form that will get you directly into application support. And learning tools, like I mentioned, we have the Shure Audio Institute that's available to the public. There's wireless workbench tutorials. There's overviews of each one of our wireless systems if you want to explore that and learn about them. You can learn about all of our wired microphones. Really tremendous resource on shure.com under support, and that wireless frequency finder. And I didn't put on here the accessories wizard, my bad. So yeah, that's the quick review there. Let's get into some questions if we have any of those.
Awesome.
Cheryl.
We don't have a ton, but hey, if you do have a question, please type it in. Now is the time. We've got some product experts here, so ask us your questions. First question we have is from a keyboard player, and they're using multi-keyboards, including our personal favorite, a Guitar. So could we discuss potential wireless solutions for a Guitar, and then maybe also, do we offer wireless MIDI, or kind of where does that fall into this whole ecosystem?
Yeah, you can very easily do wireless Guitar or wireless keyboards. It's kind of predicated on a couple of variables. If you're going into an amplifier, or if you're going into a direct box on stage, or if you're using like an effects modeling system of some kind, we can get you to any of those. Now, as far as like other routing options, that can get a little tricky. No wireless MIDI that I'm aware of yet at this time, but if your Guitar or your keyboard's got 1/4-inch outputs, you can get a guitar system. You can even use a GLXD 16 Plus or an SLXD 14, or all the way up to Axient Digital, and plug the 1/4-inch cable into the output of your Guitar and wear the pack when you're running around, and
There you go.
You're off to the races. Yeah.
Axient Digital for when your keytar absolutely cannot fail.
When it
I
cannot
love
fail.
that, Cheryl. Say that
I love a
daily.
keytar, so thanks for that question. And if you want to further explore your wireless options and really get into the nitty gritty, Mr. Keytar Player, I would highly recommend you open up a ticket with that support team. You can reach out to Pete and his fellow cohorts, all of which are pretty knowledgeable people, by going to that shure.com/contact. So start up a ticket and they'll help you figure out what's going to work best for you with your setup.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Just to kind of reiterate here, when you were talking about antennas, somebody had typed in definitely, metal, no, but talk more about sort of the wood near antennas. Is that an issue? Does that create any sort of concerns, or is that a-okay?
So it's not so much that, it's near it. For instance, if you have like a stage wall, or a backdrop, backdrops are typically cloth. Cloth's not going to present any problems unless it's got some like powdered metallic, like a finish or an acrylic paint kind of, like a shimmer quality to it. Anything metallic, that's going to be the worst. Wood, though, it'll impede it to some degree. It won't fully stop it, but we usually don't like any of those physical barriers or impediments. Obviously, if you're 6 feet from the backdrop and you're walking around with a handheld microphone and the receiver's right behind that wall, chances are it's probably still going to get picked up unless you're, talking about 2-inch thick plyboard or something like that. Then we wouldn't recommend that. But if it's a thin, like, 1/4-inch sheet, that's been painted and maybe it's not fully solid, maybe it's like a cutout of like a tree line or like, it's a ship or a boat or something. I'm thinking like old timey theater here.
I know,
It would
like,
probably
where are we going with this being?
I don't know.
Where is this
I don't
mythical
know.
place? We'd like to go there.
No, but near it, especially like if you mount the antenna to a wooden wall or a cabinet or something like that, not going to be a problem. But once you put it inside that wooden cabinet or behind a wooden wall or a wooden door, that's when we say, no, it's not going to work.
Line of sight. Line of sight.
Love it.
Line of sight. Line of
Love
sight.
it. All right. Well, that wraps up all the questions. So let's maybe talk amongst ourselves. Pete, as a guitar player, I know you're a fan of the GLXD. Is that what you're using right now with your bands?
Yeah, actually, the three of us up front, my bassist and my lead guitar player both have the original GLXD 16, and they've worked without fail for a number of years now, hundreds of shows later, all over the country, internationally. It's just worked. I have had the pleasure of road testing the new one before it hit the market, and I've put almost 100 shows on it, or 100 performances between a couple of different bands that I gig in, and it's been rock solid. It will not leave my board unless it has to. Sounds great, just works. I don't know, I've done some pretty dumb stuff on stage and run around all over the place, and it just doesn't drop out. It's been really great. Big fan, love it.
Laura, what are your go-to wireless choices? What are you using right now for your gigs?
Well, I'm solo, so I traditionally don't use wireless. It's a little bit of overkill, and I can't even maintain the minimum 10 feet distance. But when I do go wireless, no, I have a QLXD system that I love. It has swappable caps, so I love using the KSM8 capsule on there. It's a personal fave. But yeah, I'm kind of a wired gal right now, using the SM86, which is my favorite mic for my voice.
I think that's a good thing to mention too, is, wireless is awesome and it gives you freedom, and we want to sell you wireless. Don't get me wrong.
Yes,
but it's not always necessary, and don't forget that, a wired mic is, you're not going to have to worry about RF. You're not going to have to worry about the transmission. So never underestimate the power of a wired mic.
No, but I might use my GLXD 6 Plus next time, or 16 Plus, I should say, because having the ability, because I play keys and guitar, so
every now and then.
Playing an acoustic guitar and just taking that off and not having the cable get all cut up might be kind of fun and fancy.
There you go. All right. Well, I think that just about wraps up the questions. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks to Laura and Pete for all of their expertise and information. We hope you learned a little something. I know I always do. And we hope to see you on the next one. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.